now we have the last speaker, Seng Yujin. So Seng Yujin, as we were both very jet-lagged in the morning, so we met for breakfast and just talked for 2 hours. But we sort of touched upon his exhibition and also this presentation, which is very rich. And so I'm very interested to revisit some of the issues, especially after your talk with other panelists. Seng Yujin is a senior curator at the National Gallery, Singapore. He was previously a lecturer at La Salle College of the Arts in the MA Asian Art Histories and BA Fine Arts program. Seng's research interests cover regional art histories, focusing on Southeast Asian art in relation to the history of exhibitions and artist collectives in Southeast Asia. His selected exhibition projects include From Words to Pictures, Art During the Emergency in 2007, Chun So Pian, Bridging World in 2010, and Singapore Biennale. He recently co-edited Histories, Practices, and Interventions, a reader in Singapore contemporary art, and has published in journals and art magazines. Seng Yujin holds a PhD from the University of Melbourne and lectures at National University of Singapore's Art History Department. Let's welcome Seng Yujin.
Thank you, Mia. It was a wonderful breakfast. And we were just joking that maybe we should have more conversations like this and just have super long breakfasts. So actually, thank you, Mia, and also Nikita for inviting me here. And Mia actually suggested that I present on an exhibition that I co-curated that just ended 2 weeks ago. The title of the exhibition was Awakenings, Art and Society in Asia, 1960s to 1990s. So it's really a nice way to talk about this exhibition and part of the research that was kind of derived from working on this exhibition, which I would also like to acknowledge my co-curators from the Museum of Modern Art Tokyo and MMCA Korea, as well as the National Gallery Singapore, without which I would not have been able to write this paper and to present on this exhibition today. So, first of all, I'd like to talk about a kind of a conceptual framework to think about space and the politics of space. And here I draw from Henri Lefebvre and his notion of space, and I quote, "Space, thus produced, also serves as a tool of thought and of action, that in addition to being a means of production, it is also a means of control, and hence of domination of power, yet that as such it escapes in part from those who would make of it," unquote. So rapid urbanization, population growth, and industrialization in the social and political context of the Cold War have centered on the city as a kind of comparative site where these changing experience of modernization in post-war Asia is kind of explored in the exhibition Awakenings, as I mentioned earlier. So this paper adopts and expands on philosopher and social theorist Henri Lefebvre's concept of differential space as a kind of transitory space appropriated by artists whose radical ways of thinking about, making, and presenting art resist the homogenizing power of abstract spaces defined by exchange value, which is dominated by capitalism, and the state, driven by economic development. So the potential of artists to produce new spaces in terms of developing new publics or the media and mental spaces stem from the artistic interpretations and representations of urban spaces in the city. This paper demonstrates how different social relations that emerge from the making of new differential spaces are shaped by conceptualist, participatory, interdisciplinary, and most importantly, collectivist and socially engaged ways of thinking about and making art, awaken new spaces and solidarities for action that politicize and close the gap between art and life. So abstract spaces are for Lefebvre conceptualized as urban spaces that are state-regulated, driven by neo-capitalistic exchange value, and produce social relations and orders that those relations impose in the form of knowledge, science, symbols, and practices that are homogeneous, hierarchical, and fragmented. Across Asia, the proliferation of abstract spaces in Asian cities emerged within the context of economic developmentalism advanced by authoritarian regimes that privilege economic growth while embarking on a process of depoliticization through the suppression of political and individual freedoms. The buildings of skyscrapers, gridlocked roads, and reclaiming land produce abstract spaces that serve the capitalistic machine for economic growth, producing ever-widening income disparity manifested in the juxtaposition between slum areas for the disenfranchised and gated residential districts for the rich. The production of abstract spaces controlled by the state translated in the building of national monuments such as the Cultural Center of the Philippines that you see here, on a plot of reclaimed land with Imelda Marcos as its patron to construct a seemingly progressive image of fostering a Philippine national identity while being international at the same time. Which is quite weird because Manila has a lot of land and they had to reclaim land in order to build the CCP, which is amazing. So this was perpetuated at the most extreme situations by declarations of martial law or military rule as seen in the Philippines under the Ferdinand Marcos, Taiwan, under the KMT by Chiang Kai-shek, Suharto's New Order in Indonesia, and the emergency in India declared by Indira Gandhi, and China, in the Tiananmen massacre in 1989, or the adoption of the Yushin Constitution followed by martial law in South Korea as well, and a series of coups resulting in shifts between military and civilian rule in Thailand that continues till today. So on this slide, you can actually see the whole kind of series of student protest movements across Asia, including Southeast Asia. And we mustn't forget that many artists were students at that time in the 70s as well. Of course, this was post-68, after the student revolution in Paris, which has had a major impact on this series of protest movements across Asia and Southeast Asia in the 1970s. And many artists were actually students at that time and took part in these radicalized activities then. So here, although abstract spaces regulated by the state remains a dominant form of space in many Asian cities from the 1960s to the 1990s, examined in the exhibition Awakenings, Lefebvre proposed a possibility of a new type of space, the differential space, born out of contestations and contradictions within abstract spaces that is examined in this paper to include not just physical spaces, but also media and, more importantly, mental spaces. So according to Lefebvre, there are possibilities to counter the hegemony of abstract spaces that are highly regulated by the state in cities across Asia. It involves the production of differential spaces that could involve artists in appropriating abstract spaces that have been abandoned or contested by appropriating these urban spaces through modes of collective action, particularly streets, and transforming them even transitorily for new users with different sets of social relations. For Lefebvre, it was, and I quote, "In the street, a form of spontaneous theater, I become spectacle and spectator, and sometimes an actor. The street is a place to play and learn. The street is disorder. This disorder is alive. It informs. It surprises. Revolutionary events generally take place in the street," unquote. So this paper really seeks to demonstrate how artists across Asia produce diverse forms of differential spaces that contest and resist abstract spaces regulated by the state by asserting the right to the city, a term used by Lefebvre as a fundamental human right to transform the city and access its resources through collective power. It expands beyond Lefebvre's concept of space to include new forms of spatial imaginations that emerged from the 60s from artist collectives in Asia, such as media and mental spaces. Okay, so mental space. So Lefebvre also talked about mental space, and I quote, "A mental space, the space of reductions, of force and repression, of manipulation and co-option, the destroyer of nature and of the body, is quite unlikely to neutralize the enemy at the gates," unquote. So transformative ability of mental space was underrated by Lefebvre, reduced to a mere space of reductions that is impotent in the face of repression of abstract spaces. It is one of the primary propositions of Awakenings, the exhibition, that artists and their artworks played an active role in bringing to consciousness a post-colonial condition that started with the process of decolonizing the mind. So these are just kind of installation views of the exhibition, Awakenings at the National Gallery Singapore, showing kind of conceptual works that kind of question the notions of the conventions of art, as well as kind of introducing new ways of making art that was socially engaged and participatory. So this was to be achieved by awakening their audiences to dominant ways of thinking and understanding reality and history that have been shaped by colonialism. So, and I quote from Reza Piadasa, an important artist who curated the exhibition, co-curated the exhibition, and Towards a Mystical Reality, a documentation of jointly initiated experiences. And I quote from him, "There is something very religious about my obsession with actual space. It is almost metaphysical. The emptiness and the detachment are reminiscent of the spirit of Zen. The Zen garden, sand arranged in furrows and a few rocks, is the image of stillness. The more still our position and the less disturbed the immediate environment, the greater the possibility of the deepest penetration of reality. This is exactly what meditation is really about," unquote. So in this exhibition, which I will call TMR, Towards a Mystical Reality, was an exhibition organized by Sulaiman Nisa and Reza Piadasa in 1974 at the Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka, which is this building that you see over here in Kuala Lumpur, which was a collaboration that required the participation of the audience not as passive spectators but active participants in meaning making. The participatory aspirations of TMR necessitated a form of collectivism whereby the collective experiences of the participants produce their own subjectivities. Piadasa's obsession with actual space in terms of Zen metaphysical teachings like emptiness, stillness, and meditation provides insights into how TMR was conceived and displayed according to the principles of a Zen garden. So I'm kind of laying out the works of TMR at the Dewan Bahasa dan Pustaka over here, and I'll talk more about the works in this exhibition. So TMR's stated aim in its manifesto, and they actually produced a catalog kind of stating their manifesto, is to, and I quote, "sow the seeds for a thinking process which might someday liberate Malaysian artists from their dependence on Western influence," unquote. It was an attempt to open the minds of the viewer to alternative perceptions of reality. The exhibition model, so this is kind of the Zen garden, but this is the exhibition model that I made with the help of architecture students, provides insights into how the viewer could have visually experienced the exhibition space. So you can see the varying heights of the white pedestals, mirroring the rocks in a Zen garden, could have immediately captured the attention of the viewer. So if you see like a Zen garden like this, and this is an installation view of TMR. So the TMR exhibition model, which I'm rather old school, so I still make exhibition models, but it's a very useful way to understand how the works engage the viewer in a kind of embodied experience in a space, in a dialogue between the different works shown. So the varying heights of the white pedestals mirroring the rocks in the Zen garden could have immediately captured the attention of the viewer, and the TMR exhibition model shows how two Coca-Cola bottles perched on one of the highest pedestals in an exhibition could have particularly drawn the attention of the viewer as they formed a visual connection with the hanging bird cage. So you see a hanging bird cage as well. The burnt out mosquito coils, the randomly collected hair, and the shoes on pedestals of varying heights. These everyday objects, either hanging or on pedestals, resemble how the rocks in a Zen garden are normally placed. Just as the raked gravel forms currents of water that flow around the Zen garden, so the artworks on pedestals merged like rocks into one. Phenomenologically, these elements brought the participants into a flow around the entire exhibitionary space. Looking at the TMR exhibition model allows us to understand how the varying heights of the birdcage and the pedestals cohesively transformed this exhibition into an exhibitionary space where participants could enter into a meditative state and interpret the artworks within the frame of a mystical reality. So TMR sanctified ordinary objects, including organic materials such as human hair, as you see here, and there's this text that says randomly collected sample of human hair collected from a barber shop in Petaling Jaya. So this was the label that came with the object. And placing these everyday objects on white pedestals in generally a white cube gallery space, immediately prompts the viewer to appreciate these everyday objects formally as sculptural artworks, but also draws from the Taoist philosophy of experiencing the works as events, or as Christian Jitt, an important theater practitioner, articulates, and I quote him, live situations, unquote, rather than static and physical material objects. The handwritten label for randomly collected sample of human hair from a barber shop in Petaling Jaya, pasted on the pedestal itself, prompts the viewer to look beyond the apparent valuelessness of the organic human hair that will be discarded as an ephemeral found object to enter a mental rather than a rational space. The viewer shifts from relying on seeing and the retina with scientific observation as a framework in which to appraise the found object to being a participant who enters a live situation using the found object as an event-centered entry point to think about who the hair came from, did this person live in Petaling Jaya, and what can the hair tell us about this person. So these are kind of new subjectivities that are created from the spectator. So the value of the found object transformed from a material and capitalist basis to one that is experiential and based on lived everyday experiences as another form of reality, as stated in TMR's manifesto that I quote, "There are alternative ways of approaching reality, and the Western empirical and humanistic viewpoints are not the only valid ones there are," unquote. So TMR as an exhibition produced mental spaces that offered potential for decolonizing Asian minds that shifted from the West to alternative ways of thinking about art, reality, and history. Forging new mental spaces framed by post-colonial mindsets and knowledge-empowered participants as collectively active agents who could produce new subjectivities through their own initiated experiences triggered by their situational encounters with the objects in the exhibition. So the Cold War in Asia, so moving on to media space rather than mental space, the Cold War in Asia was fought on many fronts, including Southeast Asia, such as the Malayan Emergency that resulted in violent clashes between the Commonwealth forces and the Malayan National Liberation Party, which was the military arm of the Malayan Communist Party. So the phrase hearts and minds was employed by the High Commissioner, General Sir Gerald Templer, as a kind of counter-insurgency strategy to use minimal force to win the support of the Malayans. So post-war, Asia saw the introduction of media as a new technology, quickly used as a kind of propaganda as part of psychological war to win the support of the populace. So the green team here, that was shown in the Awakening exhibition from Taiwan, was an artist collective that harnessed the power of media to construct and quickly disseminate documentaries of social, environmental, and political labor movements to counter the state's use of mainstream media to shape popular opinion. So using electronic cameras, the green team was able to document the mass movements prior and after martial law in Taiwan when it was lifted in 1987. So these documentaries provided counter-hegemonic representations of political protests against military rule despite political suppression and censorship to cover anti-government events and election rallies not supported by the mainstream media. The potential of media space as a form of differential space that counters the contradictions of media that is abstracted and simplified for propaganda was adopted by artists like the Green Team, who used media as a medium of resistance to awaken and politicize the public. So next, I'll move into from media space into public space. So the festival as a kind of counter space for pleasure rather than work that escapes the regulation of abstract spaces by the state was proposed by Lefebvre as a kind of differential space. So here I look at the Jiro Jigen, which held public kind of ritualistic performances even along the Yamanote line, radically subverts existing social relations based on suppressing individuality for the common good to foster alternative perspectives driven by anarchy, by performing erotic ritualized marches in the nude as a form of corporeal disorder to reawaken bodily sensations. These anarchic interventions into public abstract spaces as a collective wearing gas masks and even crawling ritualistically, embodied primal, sinister, and erotic energies using their bodies to transform the homogeneous public spaces of the city into a surreal spectacle that disrupts the otherwise invisible machinery of capitalism in the city. So ritualistic processions that break the homogeneity of abstract public spaces in the city streets was also an artistic strategy deployed by the fourth group in Seoul. So Funeral for Established Culture and Art was an interdisciplinary loose collective comprised of writers, designers, artists, and even a Buddhist monk. So the choreographed procession carrying a coffin wrapped by the South Korean flag started the march at Sejik Park near the US Embassy, along Seoul's busy commercial district where abstract spaces dominate, and finally towards the main gate of the Gyeongbokgung Palace, I probably pronounced it wrongly, sorry, an important cultural site representing Korean culture. So 15 August 1970 was intentionally chosen for this performance as it was a public holiday commemorating Korea's liberation from Japan's Japanese occupation, which also suggested the urgent need for Korean culture to be free from all manner of colonial and authoritarian domination by closing the gap between art and everyday life. So the harassment of the police ended the performance, prematurely revealed the strict regulation of public abstract spaces under the rule of Park Chung-hee, resulting in charges of violating public laws and obstructing traffic when the artists could not convince the police that they were just doing art. So these are just kind of installation views of Harriet Center and Jiro Jigen and also Matsuzawa Yutaka in the exhibition Awakenings. So lastly, I would like to talk about the United Artists Front of Thailand, and they were very active from 1974 to 1976. And they were formed the immediate year after the toppling of Thanon Kittikachorn kind of military dictatorship in October 1973. So the United Artists Fund of Thailand opposed art that was produced for capitalism, controlled by those in power and big businesses that called for art to be relevant to the common Thai worker and farmer, and to bring culture to everyone. So these are actually images of the Thammasat University massacre in 1976, whereby the military stepped in and they actually fired at unarmed student protesters in 1976. So in my kind of research on the United Artists Fund of Thailand, I went to the University Thammasat archives, and it's one of the few archives that still retains these important archival materials of translated books written by Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong, Lenin, Marx, and these were translated into Thai by Thai students for 10 baht, so they were known as 10 baht books. Obviously, they were not making money out of this, but it shows how this kind of the ideas of Mao, Lenin, and so on were circulating among the general public in Thailand, and that was the kind of intention of these 10 baht books. So these are also kind of newspapers of recording or documenting what happened in October 1976 during the massacre, when students, I can see, were hung from trees and also burnt, as you can see here, burnt with rubber tires. So it was very, very violent. So the University Thammasat archives is particularly important because it was the first public university in Bangkok, which is very different from Chulalongkorn University, which has always been a university for the elite. But Thammasat University was the first public university whereby anyone, if you were a son or daughter from a farmer or worker, could have an opportunity to pursue higher education in Thailand, which was why, and is why still up to today, Thammasat University remains an important site of resistance and protest, particularly for democracy. So what happened was in 1976, there was this burning of leftist publications, particularly those that I've just showed you. We have only a few of those left in the Thammasat University archives. A large number of them were actually burnt and destroyed. So these are more examples of these books that were all translated into Thai. I think the issue of translation is also important for this symposium that is also looking at kind of transnational exchanges. So this is the manifesto of the United Artists Fund of Thailand, and there are certain keywords over here like big people, little people, to fight injustice in society. But in the sense that they were interested in class struggle. They were particularly against the kind of neo-American imperialism because of the Vietnam War that was happening, and America was kind of setting up military bases to use Thailand as a base from which to launch attacks in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So an important space, so when you go to Bangkok, don't just go shopping, go to the 14th October Memorial. It's a really wonderful space, and it records the whole series of 1973 to 76 protest movements for democracy in Thailand. And when I was there, lo and behold, they were having an exhibition on the Minjung Movement in South Korea. So already you see the kind of transnational connections across. Seeing that, especially looking at the history of protest movements across Asia as an important kind of historical connecting point. So this is actually the Rajadaman Avenue. That's the Democracy Monument over there, and even up to today, many protest movements in Bangkok actually start from the Democracy Monument, and they move down the Rajadaman Avenue, and this is the main avenue that leads to Thammasat University, and eventually to the Grand Palace. So it's probably the most important, symbolically powerful and important road in Bangkok. And what the United Artists Fund of Thailand did in 1975 was to organize the 75 Billboard cutout exhibition. And these billboards were huge. So as you can see here, they are almost like more than 4 meters. And they were installed right in the middle of Rajadaman Avenue between 2 lampposts. And amazingly, the lampposts still survive today. So you get the sense of the size of these billboards. And they created these billboards in collaboration with students, workers, anyone who was interested to help to make the billboards. And they displayed it in the middle of Rajadaman Avenue. So right in the middle of the road in a kind of procession. So they actually carried the billboards and then kind of like installed them in the middle of the road. You can see a lot of the images here on the billboards are kind of against the kind of neo-American kind of imperialism in Thailand, which they saw as an erosion of Thai sovereignty. So on the left, you can really see these billboards that were kind of displayed right in the middle of the road, which kind of reclaims the street, as a kind of public space controlled by the state. And they also installed these beautiful loudspeakers, and these loudspeakers actually played Thai folk music. So for the exhibition, Awakenings, this was the installation view of the exhibition. We also installed the loudspeakers and we played Thai folk music, which is really from the rural parts of Thailand. So it's a kind of very different kind of music, because it was amazing to listen to this folk rural music in a metropolitan city like Bangkok in 1975. So I actually played 2 songs. One is Man and Buffalo, which is very well known. If you ask your Thai friends, they will remember the older ones. And also Chit Pumisak. So Chit Pumisak, which is the title of the second song, he was an important Thai intellectual in the 1950s who started the Art for Life movement in Thailand. So we played these 2 songs. So this, coming back to the memorial in Bangkok, the 14th October memorial. So what happened was they actually commissioned the artists, and it was helped by Jiap or Gritiya Gawiwong to kind of work with the surviving artists of the United Artists Fund of Thailand to reproduce these billboards. But now they are kind of 1/4 the actual size, not the full billboard size. So yeah, just to show you images as they were on display in the memorial. They also produced many posters like this ones, and these are kind of translated like suppressing the people, fight, protect democracy, and the center of university students of Thailand. So these were posters because it was before the period of social media. So the only way to gather people was really by pasting posters all over Bangkok, all over the city. We are gathering here at this time, and that was a way in which they kind of communicated back then, which is great for us because we get to show the posters. Not many remain, but we managed to show them for the exhibition. So in conclusion, shared connected social and political conditions across Asia from the 1960s to the 1980s, or varying forms of military, authoritarian, and political control asserted by the state produced abstract spaces that regulated public spaces, epitomized by streets of symbolic value, such as the Rajadaman Avenue in Bangkok, that led to the royal palaces and the universities. So artists, through collectives that are interdisciplinary, working across different cultural fields, transform these abstract spaces of state control into spaces for action, by creating transitory differential spaces to activate the audience, not as passive spectators, but participants with agency to make social change. Differential spaces are not only restricted to concrete physical forms, as this paper has shown how mental and media spaces were equally important in reframing the mindsets of people through critical thinking that questions and destabilizes dominant ideologies and ways of thinking by propositioning alternatives. The differential space produced by appropriating abstract spaces of streets into sites that are recoded for social critique are transformed into counter hegemonic spaces that provoke action based on the right to difference and action, and ultimately the right to actively participate in the transformation of the city. Thank you.